Before this story begins, let me ask you something. Have you ever bought something you couldn't really afford, just so someone else would look at you a certain way? Have you ever felt embarrassed about your car in a parking lot full of nicer ones, even though your car runs fine and theirs is leased down to the last payment? Have you ever wondered why the people who actually have money so often look like they don't?
This is the story of a man named Frank Delgado, an accountant, 44 years old, who wore the same $12 canvas shoes to work for 15 straight years. Not because he had to, but because he decided to. Before we go further, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Because here we share quiet, uncomfortable truths about money, discipline, and the small decisions nobody claps for.
Frank worked on the 4th floor of a mid-sized accounting firm in a city that took itself a little too seriously. Everyone around him leased German cars, wore watches that cost more than his rent, and treated Fridays like a small fashion show. Frank wore the same pair of flat canvas shoes, scuffed at the toe, laces replaced twice. His car was an 11-year-old Civic with a dent in the door he'd never bothered fixing.
His lunch came from home, in the same scratched Tupperware every single day. People assumed things about Frank. Mostly they assumed he was barely getting by. Except that wasn't quite true of the people around him. Nearly every one of Frank's coworkers had what he privately called the upgrade reflex. The moment a small raise or bonus landed, before it even cleared, it was already spent. A slightly nicer car, a slightly bigger apartment, a slightly better watch. Not because they needed those things, because a raise that didn't show felt somehow like it hadn't really happened. The upgrade wasn't about comfort. It was about being seen moving up.
Frank watched this happen for years. The same 5 or 6 people cycling through nicer cars every 3 years, always one paycheck ahead of the last purchase, never actually ahead of anything at all. For a while, Frank almost believed the story too. Early in his career, he told himself that once he made partner, once he hit a certain number, he'd finally allow himself to look the part. The watch, the car, the tailored suits that actually fit.
He held on to that idea, the way some people hold on to a lottery ticket. Someday, when I've really made it, I'll let people see it. But the promotions came, and the someday kept moving. Partner wasn't the finish line he thought it would be. There was always a next tier of people spending more, dressing sharper, looking further ahead of him than he felt. One evening, waiting for a late meeting to start, Frank sat in the parking garage and watched a senior partner, a man everyone assumed was worth millions, get into a 5-year-old minivan with a cracked windshield, still in his tie, exhausted. Frank had assumed, like everyone else, that Harold drove something impressive. He didn't. He drove a car nobody would look at twice, in a garage full of leased luxury sedans that belonged to associates making a third of his salary. Frank sat there a long moment, keys in hand, before he pulled out of his own spot behind him. A few weeks later, Frank finally asked Harold about it directly, half joking in the break room. "You could drive anything you wanted. Why the minivan?" Harold didn't laugh. He set down his coffee and looked at Frank for a second, like he was deciding whether it was worth explaining. "Every dollar somebody sees on you is a dollar working for somebody else's opinion instead of your future," Harold said. "I stopped paying that tax 20 years ago. Nobody who matters is keeping score, and everyone who is keeping score isn't worth impressing." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "The year I stopped trying to look successful was the year I actually became it." Frank thought about that conversation for weeks. It wasn't really about shoes or cars or watches. It was about a tax he hadn't noticed he was paying his entire career. The cost of managing how he appeared to people whose opinions changed nothing about his actual life. He realized the goal was never to look like he had less,
The goal was to stop needing to look like anything at all and let the money that used to fund an image start funding an actual future instead. If you've ever felt embarrassed about a car that runs perfectly fine, or a coat that's a few years old, or shoes that have done their job without complaint, ask yourself honestly, who exactly are you dressing for, and what has their opinion ever done for you?
If this is landing, take a second to subscribe, because the next story might change how you look at your own closet, your own driveway, your own next paycheck. That week, Frank did something small. He took the raise he'd been planning to put toward a better car and instead set up an automatic transfer, the same fixed amount moved before he ever saw it, into an investment account he'd been meaning to get to eventually for years.
He kept the shoes. He kept the Civic. He kept the same Tupperware. Nothing about his life looked any different from the outside, which was exactly the point. Frank came to understand two things he wished someone had told him at 25. The first was that looking successful and being financially free were often opposites, competing for the exact same dollars.
Every dollar spent signaling status was a dollar that could no longer compound quietly in the background. The second was harder to admit. The discomfort of looking modest was temporary and mostly imagined, but the discomfort of actually being behind, 3 years in, then 10, then 20, was permanent and real. He'd been avoiding the wrong discomfort his entire career.
2 years into the new habit, Frank checked his account one evening out of simple curiosity, and for the first time in his adult life, the number surprised him. Not because it was a fortune, but because it existed at all, quietly, without ever requiring a decision from him twice. He didn't tell anyone at the office. There was nothing to show. That was still exactly the point. The real shift came later. With actual savings behind him for the first time, Frank stopped needing his job the way he used to. He negotiated harder in a review he would have once been too anxious to push on, because for the first time, walking away was a real option, not just a phrase. He got the raise. He didn't buy anything with it.
Frank still wears the same style of $12 shoes, not because he can't afford better, he very much can now, but because he never went back to needing anyone to know that. The people who looked poor were rarely actually poor. They'd simply stopped spending their future on other people's opinions of their present. What's one thing in your life you're still upgrading just to be seen? Tell me below. I read every comment, and I might feature yours in the next story.